The dust kicked up around Rose Sullivan's worn boots as she stood at her husband's grave for what she swore would be the final time. The Oklahoma sun beating down mercilessly on the small cemetery outside Taylorsville in the summer of 1876. She had cried all her tears 3 years ago when they buried Thomas, and now she felt nothing but a cold emptiness that had settled deep in her chest like a stone at the bottom of a well. She was 25 years old and felt ancient, her heart hardened by loss and the brutal reality of trying to run a ranch alone in territory that showed no mercy to weakness. Rose pulled her faded bonnet lower over her sun-weathered face and turned away from the grave marker, her jaw set in that familiar stubborn line that the townspeople had come to recognize. She had loved Thomas Sullivan with everything she had, married him at 18 full of hope and dreams, and watched him die slowly from fever while she felt helpless to stop it. The ranch they had built together from nothing became her prison and her fortress, the only thing standing between her and complete destitution. She worked it alone with a determination that bordered on obsession, refusing help from neighbors, turning away potential ranch hands with sharp words and sharper glares. The walk back to her property took nearly an hour in the oppressive heat, but Rose had made this journey so many times she could have done it blind. Her ranch house stood weathered and gray against the endless Oklahoma prairie, the barn behind it listing slightly to one side from a storm 2 winters past that she had not had the strength or money to repair properly. 60 head of cattle grazed on land that could have supported 3 times that many, but she could not manage more alone. The garden she had once tended with care now grew wild with weeds choking out the vegetables. Everything about the place spoke of struggle and stubbornness in equal measure. She was drawing water from the well when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Rose straightened, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle she kept propped against the well's stone edge. A lone rider crested the small rise that marked the boundary of her property, sitting easy in the saddle astride a handsome chestnut mare. As he drew closer, Rose could make out a tall man in his late 20s with sun-bleached brown hair visible beneath his wide-brimmed hat, his clothes dusty from travel, but of good quality. "That is close enough," Rose called out when he was still 20 yards away, her voice carrying clear and cold across the distance. "State your business or move on." The rider drew his horse to a stop and raised both hands to show they were empty. "Name is Marcus Anderson, madam. I am looking for work and heard in town there might be a ranch out this way that could use an extra pair of hands." "You heard wrong." Rose's voice was flat, final. "I am not hiring." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than offended. Even from this distance, Rose could see his eyes were a startling shade of blue-green, like the creek water in spring. "Begging your pardon, madam, but your barn is listing bad enough that another strong wind might take it down completely. Your fences in the south pasture have gaps big enough for your cattle to wander through. And unless I miss my guess, you are working this place alone, which means you are running yourself into an early grave." Rose felt anger flash hot through her chest, burning away the cold emptiness for just a moment. "What I do with my property is no concern of yours, Mr. Anderson. Now get off my land." Instead of turning his horse around, Marcus dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He was taller than Rose had estimated, probably over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of a man who knew hard work. "I will make you a deal, madam. Let me fix your barn door, the one hanging off its hinges there. If you do not like my work, I will ride on and never bother you again. But if I do a good job, you consider letting me stay on for a week, just to get some of the bigger repairs done. I will work for food and a place to sleep in the barn, no pay needed. And why would you do that? Rose demanded, suspicion coloring every word. Nobody works for free. What are you really after? Marcus met her gaze steadily, and she saw no guile in his face, only a quiet earnestness that somehow made her even more uncomfortable. I have been drifting since I mustered out of the cavalry 3 months back, fought Indians and outlaws and saw things that sit heavy on my soul. I reckon doing some honest work helping someone who needs it might ease that weight some. That is all I am after, madam. Just a chance to do something good. Rose wanted to say no, to send him away like she had sent away every other person who had tried to help over the past 3 years. But even as she opened her mouth to refuse, her eyes drifted to that barn door hanging by a single hinge, then to the sagging roofline, then to the fences she knew were falling apart but had no energy to fix. Pride was one thing. Stupidity was another. If the barn collapsed, she would lose what little equipment and winter hay she had managed to put by. Fine, she said curtly, each word feeling like pulling teeth. Fix the door, but do not expect conversation and do not expect me to like it. When you finish, I will look at your work. That is all I am promising. Marcus nodded, a small smile tugging at one corner of his mouth but not quite forming. Yes, madam, that is all I am asking. He unsaddled his mare and turned her into the small corral beside the barn, then spent a few minutes examining the broken door and the tools available in the barn's dim interior. Rose tried to go back to her work, hauling water to the vegetable garden and feeding her chickens, but she found her eyes constantly drifting to where Marcus worked. He moved with an easy competence, his hands sure and steady as he removed the broken hinge and examined the door frame. He found scraps of wood from a pile of discards behind the barn and used them to reinforce the frame where rot had weakened it. The sound of his hammer rang clear in the afternoon air, steady and rhythmic. Rose made herself go inside the house and tried to focus on preparing her meager dinner. She had beans soaking and some salt pork that needed cooking. Almost against her will, she found herself putting more beans in the pot than she would have for herself alone, adding extra pork, baking enough cornbread for 2 people instead of 1. She told herself it was payment for the work, nothing more. She owed him that much if he was truly going to fix the door properly. When the sun was low on the horizon, painting the Oklahoma sky in shades of orange and gold, Marcus knocked on her door frame. Rose had been watching for him without admitting it to herself, and she came outside before he could knock again. Door is fixed, he said simply. I reinforced the frame and replaced both hinges using some spare hardware I found in your barn. Should hold solid now through any weather. Rose walked to the barn and examined his work critically. The door hung straight and true, swinging smoothly when she tested it. The reinforced frame was neat work, the new hinges properly aligned. She could find no fault with it, though part of her wanted to. It will do, she said grudgingly. There is food inside. You can eat, then sleep in the barn like you said. Tomorrow morning, if you are still inclined to stay the week, I will show you what needs doing. Marcus's smile reached his eyes this time, crinkling the corners in a way that made him look younger. Thank you, madam. I appreciate it. Inside her small kitchen, Rose served the food onto 2 tin plates and set them on the rough wooden table Thomas had built their first year together. She sat across from Marcus, painfully aware that this was the first time she had shared a meal with anyone in nearly a year. They ate in silence at first, but Marcus eventually spoke, his voice quiet and respectful. This is fine cooking, madam. Best meal I have had in longer than I care to remember. It is just beans and pork, Rose said dismissively. though she felt an unwelcome flutter of something at the compliment. Nothing special. Sometimes the simple things are the best things. Marcus took another bite of cornbread, then added carefully, "Folk in town said you lost your husband some years back. I am sorry for your loss. That must have been hard." Rose's fork clattered against her plate more loudly than she intended. "I do not discuss my personal affairs with strangers, Mr. Anderson. You are here to work, nothing more." "Yes, madam." He did not seem offended, just nodded and continued eating. Did not mean to overstep. They finished the meal in silence. Rose cleared the plates while Marcus thanked her again and headed out to the barn. She stood at her kitchen window long after he left, watching the lamplight glowing through the barn's gaps and feeling something uncomfortable stirring beneath the protective ice around her heart. She did not like it. She did not like having someone else on her property, disrupting the careful isolation she had built. But she could not deny that the barn door was fixed better than she could have managed alone. That night, Rose lay in her empty bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar creaks and groans of the house settling. She thought about Thomas, about the plans they had made and the future they had dreamed of that would never come to pass. She thought about the past 3 years of grinding loneliness and exhausting labor, the way each day had blurred into the next in an endless cycle of mere survival. And she thought about the stranger sleeping in her barn with his steady hands and patient eyes, and wondered what she had allowed onto her property. Morning came too early, as it always did. Rose woke before dawn and dressed quickly in her work clothes, already planning her day. She would set Marcus to work on the worst of the fence repairs while she dealt with the cattle. The less they had to interact, the better. She could give him tasks and leave him to them, maintaining the distance she needed. But when she stepped outside, she found Marcus had already been up for some time. The small pile of firewood beside her house had been restocked from the larger wood pile, neatly split and stacked. The water barrel by the kitchen door was full. He was in the corral, checking over his mare's hooves with the practiced eye of someone who knew horses well. "Morning, madam," he called when he noticed her. "Hope you do not mind. I took care of a few small things. Figured I might as well make myself useful." Rose felt that flutter again, stronger this time, and crushed it ruthlessly. "The south fences need the most work. I will show you where." They walked the property together, Rose pointing out the sections of fence that were falling apart or missing entirely. Marcus listened carefully, asking occasional questions about property boundaries and where she wanted to move her cattle once the fences were secure. His questions were practical and showed he knew ranching, which Rose grudgingly appreciated. At least she would not have to explain every little thing. "This will take more than a week," Marcus observed, surveying the extent of the damage. "More like 2, maybe 3 to do it properly, but I can make a good start on it." "1 week," Rose said firmly. "That was the agreement. After that you move on." "Yes, madam, 1 week." They worked separately through the day, Rose tending to her cattle and the dozen other tasks that kept the ranch functioning. Marcus cutting and hauling fence posts from a stand of trees at the edge of her property. Rose found herself riding past where he worked more often than was necessary, though she told herself she was just checking on his progress. He worked steadily, efficiently, taking breaks when sensible but never lingering. He had stripped down to his undershirt in the heat, and Rose noticed despite herself the play of muscles across his back and shoulders as he swung the axe. That evening, she again found herself cooking for 2. It was easier this time, less jarring to set out 2 plates. Marcus washed up at the pump before coming to the door, his hair wet and slicked back, his face clean of the day's dust. "How was your day, madam?" he asked as they began eating. "Fine." Rose kept her answer short, not inviting further conversation. Marcus was quiet for a few moments, then tried again. "Those are good cattle you have. I noticed a few might be ready to calve soon. You planning to keep the calves or sell them come fall?" Despite herself, Rose found she wanted to answer. It had been so long since she had anyone to discuss ranch business with. "Keep the heifers, sell the steers if they are big enough. I need to build my breeding stock back up." "That is smart thinking. You have good grazing land here. With the right management, you could probably support 3 times what you have now." "I know that." Rose's voice was sharp. "But I am just one person, Mr. Anderson. There are only so many hours in a day." "Yes, madam. I was not criticizing, just observing." He took another bite, then added carefully, "Your husband must have been a good man to build this place up as much as he did." Rose felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "He was. And then he died and left me to manage it all alone." The words came out more bitter than she intended, and she saw Marcus glance at her with something that might have been sympathy or understanding. "That must have made you angry," he said quietly. The observation was so unexpected, so different from the usual platitudes about God's will and being strong, that Rose actually looked at him directly for the first time since he had arrived. "What? Being left alone like that? Having all this responsibility dropped on you?" "I imagine that would make a person angry, alongside the grief." Rose felt something crack inside her chest, just a hairline fracture in the ice. "I do not need you to analyze my feelings, Mr. Anderson." "No, madam, you do not. I apologize." But his eyes were kind, and Rose saw in them a recognition that unsettled her. He understood. Somehow this stranger understood what no one else had seen or acknowledged. She had been angry, was still angry. Angry at Thomas for dying, angry at God for taking him, angry at herself for not being enough to save him. She stood abruptly, gathering the dishes. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Marcus rose as well, nodding. "Thank you again for the meal, madam. Your cooking keeps getting better." "It is the same food as yesterday," Rose said, but there was less edge to her voice. "Maybe, or maybe I just appreciate it more." He smiled slightly and headed out to the barn. That night, Rose dreamed of Thomas for the first time in months. They were young again, just married, working together to build the first fence line on their property. But in the dream, Thomas kept fading, becoming more transparent until she could see right through him. She called his name, but he could not hear her. When she woke, her face was wet with tears she had not known she was crying. The days began to blur together in a new way, no longer the monotonous sameness of pure survival, but with a different rhythm that included Marcus's steady presence. He worked on the fences, repaired the barn's roofline, fixed a broken wheel on her wagon, doctored a cow with an infected cut on her leg. He was always respectful, always keeping the proper distance, never pushing into spaces Rose did not invite him. But he was there, solid and dependable, and despite her best efforts to maintain her isolation, Rose found the walls around her heart developing more cracks. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in with the sudden violence that Oklahoma weather was known for. Rose was in the far pasture when the sky darkened, and she barely made it back to the house before the rain started coming down in sheets. She was soaked through despite her oilskin coat, shivering as she stood in her kitchen and tried to get warm. Through the window, she could see Marcus racing to secure the barn doors and herd her chickens into their coop. Without thinking about it, Rose put the kettle on and made coffee. When Marcus finished securing everything and came running through the rain to knock on her door, she opened it immediately. "Get in here before you catch your death," she said, stepping aside. Marcus hesitated. "I am dripping wet, madam. I will ruin your floors." "They are just floors." "They will dry. Get inside." He came in, water pooling around his boots. Rose handed him a towel and poured 2 cups of coffee. They stood at the window together, watching the storm rage outside, listening to thunder roll across the prairie. "I love storms," Marcus said quietly. "Always have since I was a boy. Something about the power of them, the way they remind you how small you really are." "They frighten me," Rose admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "Thomas died during a storm. I know the fever killed him, not the weather, but I cannot help associating the two. Every storm feels like something is being taken away." Marcus turned to look at her, and the understanding in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "That must make them especially hard to endure out here." "Everything is hard to endure out here." The words spilled out before she could stop them. 3 years of exhaustion and loneliness and grinding effort suddenly demanding acknowledgement. "Every single day is hard. Getting up is hard. Working until I can barely stand is hard. Going to sleep alone is hard. And storms that remind me of the worst day of my life are particularly hard." "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met," Marcus said softly. "To keep going the way you have, to maintain this place alone, to not give up even when everything must feel impossible. That takes a kind of courage most people do not have." Rose felt tears burning behind her eyes and refused to let them fall. "I am not brave. I am just stubborn. I do not know how to quit, even when quitting might be the smarter choice." "That is brave. That is one of the bravest things there is." They stood in silence, drinking their coffee while the storm raged outside. Rose felt something shifting inside her, the ice beginning to thaw in a way that terrified her. She had worked so hard to not feel anything, to not let anyone close enough to hurt her again. But Marcus was slipping past her defenses simply by being patient, by showing up day after day and doing good work and not asking for anything in return. "Your week is almost up," she said, changing the subject to something safer. "Another 2 days and you will be free to move on." "Yes, madam." Marcus's voice was neutral, but Rose thought she detected something in it, a note of regret perhaps. "I will have the south fences finished by then, and the barn is solid now. You should be set for a while. And then you will go back to drifting, I suppose so. Unless I find a reason to stay somewhere." The implication hung in the air between them. Rose wanted to ignore it, to pretend she had not heard the question beneath his words. But she found herself asking, "Have you found a reason here?" Marcus looked at her directly, his blue-green eyes holding hers. "I think I might have if the lady of the house were inclined to let me stay. But I know she values her independence and has no interest in charity or pity. So I will respect her wishes, whatever they might be." "This lady does not need anyone," Rose said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "No, madam, she does not. She has proven that over and over. But needing someone and wanting someone are different things. And letting someone help is not the same as being weak." Rose turned away, unable to hold his gaze any longer. "You do not know what you are talking about." "Maybe not. But I know what I see. I see a woman who loved her husband deeply and lost him too young. Who built walls around her heart so high that no one could reach her and nothing could hurt her again. Who works herself to exhaustion rather than risk letting anyone close. And I see how lonely that makes her, even if she would never admit it. You presume too much, Mr. Anderson." Rose's voice was cold, but her hands were shaking. "Yes, madam, I probably do, and I apologize for overstepping." Marcus set down his coffee cup. "The storm is lessening. I should get back to the barn and make sure nothing leaked through the roof." He left before Rose could respond, and she watched him walk through the thinning rain back to the barn. She stood at the window long after he disappeared inside, her reflection ghostly in the glass, and wondered when exactly she had stopped seeing him as an unwanted intrusion and started seeing him as something else entirely. The fifth day dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Rose woke early and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand what was happening to her. She had been so certain she would never feel anything for anyone again, that the part of her capable of love had died with Thomas. But something had taken root despite her best efforts to prevent it, something that grew a little stronger each time Marcus smiled at her, each time he spoke to her with that careful respect and patient understanding. She found him already at work when she emerged from the house, setting new fence posts with methodical efficiency. Rose brought him water and stood watching while he drank. "2 more days," she said. "Yes, madam. And if I asked you to stay longer?" Marcus lowered the dipper slowly, his eyes searching her face. "Is that what you are asking?" Rose took a breath, the words difficult but necessary. "I am saying I might consider extending your employment for pay this time. Real wages. There is more work than can be done in a week, and you are good at what you do." "I am not looking for wages, madam. I told you that from the start." "Then what are you looking for, Mr. Anderson?" He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "I am looking for a place to belong. For work that matters. For someone who might eventually see me as more than just a hired hand passing through." He paused, then added softly, "And I am starting to think I might have found all 3 things here, if you could ever bring yourself to let me stay." Rose felt her heart hammering in her chest. "I do not know if I can do that. Let someone stay, I mean. Let someone matter. I did that once, and when I lost him, it nearly destroyed me. I know, and I am not asking you to make any promises. I am just asking for a chance to keep showing up, keep working, keep being here. However long it takes for you to decide if you might want that on a more permanent basis. And if I decide I do not, then I will respect that and move on. No hard feelings, no recriminations." Rose studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but all she saw was that same patient honesty that had characterized every interaction they had had. "You are a strange man, Marcus Anderson." "Yes, madam, I have been told that before." He smiled slightly. "Is that a yes to me staying on longer?" "It is a maybe leaning toward yes, which is more than I would have thought possible a week ago. I will take it. A maybe leaning toward yes is more than I had any right to hope for." They went back to work, but something had shifted between them. The air felt different, charged with possibility. Rose caught herself smiling as she worked, then had to remind herself not to get ahead of things. But the ice around her heart was melting faster now, cracks spreading and widening, and she found she was not as frightened of it as she had expected to be. That evening, Rose did something she had not done in 3 years. She changed out of her work clothes before dinner, putting on a dress that was not quite as faded and worn. She brushed her hair properly and pinned it up in a way that was almost presentable. When Marcus knocked on the door, she saw his eyes widen slightly at the sight of her. "You look very nice, madam," he said quietly. "It is just an old dress," Rose said dismissively, but she felt her cheeks warm. "It is not the dress. It is you." They ate dinner together, and for the first time Rose allowed real conversation. She asked Marcus about his life before he came to her ranch, and he told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, about joining the cavalry at 20, about the years spent in conflicts that still haunted his dreams. "I have seen men at their worst and their best," he said, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I have seen cruelty that makes me ashamed to be human, and kindness that restores my faith. I learned that life is short and unpredictable, and that the only things that really matter are the connections we make and the good we do while we are here." Is that why you are so determined to help me? To do good? Partly. But mostly it is because I see something in you that calls to something in me. A strength and resilience that I admire. A heart that is still capable of love even though it has been wounded. And maybe a chance at something real if you will let it happen. Rose felt her breath catch. You do not even know me. I know you better than you think. I know you get up before dawn every day and work until you can barely stand. I know you talk to your chickens when you think no one is listening. I know you visit your husband's grave even though it breaks your heart because you feel you owe him that loyalty. I know you are terrified of letting anyone matter to you again because losing them might kill you this time. Stop. Rose's voice was barely a whisper. Please stop. I am sorry. I did not mean to upset you. Marcus reached across the table as if to touch her hand, then stopped himself. I just want you to know that I see you, Rose Sullivan, not the bitter widow who keeps everyone at arm's length, but the real woman underneath all that armor, and I like what I see. Rose stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. She fled outside into the gathering darkness, her heart racing and her thoughts in chaos. Marcus found her at the corral fence a few minutes later. He did not speak, just stood beside her looking out at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. I loved him so much, Rose said finally, her voice breaking. Thomas was everything to me. We had so many plans, so many dreams. And then he got sick, and I watched him fade away day by day, and there was nothing I could do. I was useless, helpless. He died anyway, and I was left with all these dreams that would never come true and a future that looked nothing like what I had imagined. I am sorry. That is a terrible thing to endure. I promised myself I would never feel that helpless again, never care about someone so much that losing them could destroy me. It was safer to be alone, to need no one, to let no one in. And now? Rose turned to look at him, this patient man who had somehow slipped past all her defenses. Now I am terrified because I think I might be starting to care about you, and I do not know how to do that without being afraid all the time. Marcus reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not move, he took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. I cannot promise you that nothing bad will ever happen. Life does not work that way. But I can promise that I will be honest with you, that I will respect you, and that I will work hard every day to be worthy of whatever trust you might choose to give me. That is all I can offer. What if it is not enough? What if I cannot get past this fear? Then we will deal with that when and if it happens. But Rose, you are already past the hardest part. You are letting yourself feel again. That took more courage than you know. Rose squeezed his hand just slightly and felt something settle into place inside her chest. Stay, please. Not for a week or for wages. Just stay because I think I want you here. Marcus smiled, and in the starlight he looked younger, hopeful. I was hoping you might say that. They stood together at the fence, holding hands like young people courting, and Rose felt the last of the ice around her heart crack apart. It hurt, but it was a good hurt, the kind that came with healing. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and slowly deepening connection. Marcus moved from the barn to the small room off the kitchen that Thomas had built intending to use as an office. He was scrupulously respectful of Rose's space and boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But he was there, solid and constant, and Rose found herself leaning on that steadiness more than she had thought possible. They worked together during the days, and Rose discovered that ranching was easier and more enjoyable with a partner. Marcus had a knack for understanding the cattle, a patience with the horses, and a way of approaching problems that complemented her own. They developed an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs and movements in a way that felt natural. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch and talked. Marcus told her more about his years in the cavalry, the friends he had made and lost, the ways the experience had changed him. Rose found herself opening up about her marriage to Thomas, about the good years before his illness, about the guilt she felt for starting to move on. "He would want you to be happy," Marcus said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Any man who loved you properly would want that." "How do you know what Thomas would have wanted?" "Because if I loved you and lost you, I would want you to find happiness again. I would want someone to care for you the way you deserve. I would not want you to spend the rest of your life alone and bitter." Rose was quiet for a long moment. "You said if you loved me, do you?" Marcus turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I am falling in love with you, Rose. Have been since the day you grudgingly let me fix your barn door. I know it is too soon and I am not asking you to say anything back, but I will not lie to you. What I feel is real." Rose felt tears prick her eyes, but for once they were not tears of grief or fear. "I think I am falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me. We can be terrified together." Marcus reached over and took her hand. "And we can take it as slow as you need." But Rose found she did not want to take it slow anymore. She had spent 3 years frozen in place, and now that she was thawing, she wanted to embrace the warmth. That night, when Marcus walked her to her bedroom door, she stood on her toes and kissed him gently. His arms came around her carefully, and he returned the kiss with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "Stay with me," she whispered against his lips. "I do not want to be alone anymore." "Are you sure?" "I am sure." They made love slowly, carefully, learning each other in the darkness of her room. It was different from her memories of Thomas, because Marcus was a different person, and she was a different woman than the girl who had married at 18. But it was good, beautiful in its own way, and when Rose woke the next morning wrapped in Marcus's arms, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt hopeful. Summer gave way to autumn, and the ranch flourished under their combined care. Marcus hired 2 additional hands to help with the fall roundup, young men from town who were hard workers and respectful of Rose's authority. They sold their steers for a good price at market, the best Rose had managed in 3 years. With the money, they repaired the house properly, replaced all the worst fencing, and bought more breeding stock to expand the herd. Rose found herself laughing again, really laughing, at Marcus's dry observations and terrible jokes. She found herself making plans for the future that extended beyond just surviving to the next season. She found herself falling more deeply in love with each passing day, the fear gradually receding as trust and affection grew stronger. One evening in October, as they sat together watching the stars, Marcus asked, "Rose Sullivan, would you consider marrying me?" Rose felt her heart skip. "Are you proposing?" "Not yet. I am asking if you would consider it if I were to propose properly. I do not want to rush you or push you into anything you are not ready for. But I love you, and I want to build a life with you, and if you think you might eventually want the same thing, I would like to know." Rose turned to face him fully. "Marcus Anderson, I do not need you to propose properly or wait any longer. Yes, I will marry you. I want to marry you. I want to build that life together." Marcus pulled her close, kissing her deeply. "Thank God. I was prepared to wait as long as necessary, but I am glad I do not have to." "You have already waited long enough. You have been patient with me, gentle with my fears, constant when I tried to push you away. You have proven yourself 100 times over. I trust you. I love you, and I want to be your wife." They were married in Taylorsville on a crisp November morning, in the small church with half the town in attendance. Rose wore a new dress of deep blue, and Marcus stood beside her in his best suit, his eyes never leaving her face as they exchanged vows. It was a small ceremony, simple and heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Rose felt Thomas's memory settle gently into the past where it belonged. She would always love him, always remember him, but she was ready to move forward now with Marcus by her side. Their wedding night was spent at the ranch, in the house they both now called home. Marcus carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and they made love with a joy and abandon that Rose had not known she was still capable of. Afterward, lying in his arms, she whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Thank you for letting me stay," he whispered back, "for letting me in, for giving us a chance." Winter came and they weathered it together, the house warm and full of life in a way it had not been for years. They played cards in the evenings and read books aloud to each other. They made love and made plans and made each other laugh. Rose discovered that being married to Marcus was easy in all the ways that mattered. They disagreed sometimes, as any two people would, but they talked through their differences with respect and care. Spring arrived, and with it came the news that Rose was pregnant. She told Marcus one morning in April, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes went wide with wonder, then filled with tears as he pulled her close. "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am elated, amazed, terrified, grateful." He pulled back to look at her, his hands gentle on her face. "Are you happy? I know this might bring up complicated feelings about what you lost before." Rose smiled, and it was genuine and full. "I am happy, truly happy. This is not replacing anything that came before. This is something new, something ours, and I want it more than I can say." Their son was born in December, right before Christmas, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. They named him Thomas Marcus Anderson, honoring both the past and the present. Marcus cried when he held his son for the first time, and Rose fell in love with him all over again, watching the tenderness with which he handled the tiny life they had created together. The years that followed were full in the best possible way. The ranch continued to grow and prosper under their joint management. They hired permanent hands, built a larger barn, expanded their herd until it was one of the most successful operations in the region. Rose's reputation shifted from the bitter widow who wanted nothing to do with anyone to a respected rancher and member of the community. She made friends again, attended socials, opened her home for gatherings. 2 years after Thomas was born, they had a daughter they named Mary Grace. 3 years after that, another son they called James. Their house rang with laughter and the sounds of children playing. Rose's garden grew lush and productive again. The ranch that had once been her prison became her pride and joy, a testament to what could be built with patience, love, and partnership. Marcus proved to be a devoted father, patient with the children's endless questions and boundless energy. Rose would sometimes watch him teaching Thomas how to rope a calf or reading to Mary Grace on the porch, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built. The fear that had gripped her for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence in the future. One evening, 15 years after Marcus had first ridden onto her property and asked to fix her barn door, they sat together on that same porch watching the sunset. Their children were grown now. Thomas was 19 and working the ranch full-time, already showing the same patient competence his father had. Mary Grace was 17, helping her mother with the books and showing a sharp mind for business. James was 12, still young enough to cause mischief but old enough to be useful when he put his mind to it. "You ever regret it?" Rose asked Marcus, her hand in his. "Stopping here instead of moving on? You could have had an easier life somewhere else with someone less complicated." Marcus lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Not for a single day. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rose. This life we built together, this family, this ranch. It is everything I never knew I wanted until I found it. I was so determined to push you away. I do not know why you did not just give up on me. Because I saw who you really were underneath all that armor. I saw your strength and your heart, and I knew that if you could just let yourself heal, you would be worth any amount of patience." He smiled at her, his eyes still the same blue-green that had struck her that first day. "I was right. You were." Rose leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had never wavered. "I love you, Marcus Anderson. I love you too, Rose Anderson. Every single day, more than the last." They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear, just as they had done countless times over the years. The ranch that had once represented only pain and struggle now stood as proof of what love and patience could build. Rose thought about the bitter, guarded woman she had been, working herself to death rather than risk feeling anything. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. Marcus had melted her walls one day at a time, with quiet competence and gentle persistence. He had seen past her defenses to the wounded heart beneath, and had waited, patient and constant, until she was ready to heal. And in healing, in learning to love again, Rose had found a life richer and fuller than she had imagined possible. Their children would carry on the ranch when the time came. They would build their own lives and families, create their own stories. But they would do it knowing they came from love, from parents who had found each other against the odds and built something lasting. That legacy, Rose thought, was worth more than any amount of land or cattle. Inside the house, she could hear Thomas playing his guitar, a skill his father had taught him. Mary Grace was singing along, her voice sweet and clear. James was probably getting into something he should not, but that was just his way. The sounds of her family, her full and happy life, wrapped around Rose like a warm blanket. "Penny for your thoughts," Marcus said softly. "I was just thinking about how grateful I am. For all of this. For you most of all. You saved me, Marcus, not from anything external but from myself. From a life of loneliness and bitterness that I had resigned myself to. You showed me I could be more than my grief." "We saved each other," Marcus corrected gently. "I was drifting, looking for purpose, trying to outrun my own demons. You gave me a home and a reason to stay. You gave me a life worth living. We did that together." Rose nodded, accepting the truth of his words. They had saved each other. It had not been dramatic or sudden, but gradual and steady, built on a foundation of respect and patience that had grown into deep and abiding love. The years continued to pass, bringing their own joys and challenges. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, celebrated births and mourned deaths, saw their children grow and marry and have children of their own. Through it all, Rose and Marcus remained constant to each other, their love deepening and maturing like good wine. On their 20th anniversary, Marcus took Rose back to the cemetery where Thomas was buried. It was the first time she had been there in years, and she approached the grave marker with a mixture of emotions. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked Marcus quietly. "Because I wanted to thank him," Marcus said simply. "He loved you and built this ranch with you. He was part of making you who you are. I wanted to pay my respects to the man who came before me, and to let him know, wherever he is, that I have taken care of you just like I promised I would." Rose felt tears streaming down her face, but they were clean tears, free of the bitter grief that had characterized her mourning for so long. "You did not promise him anything. You did not know him." "No, but I made a promise to myself the day I decided to stay. That I would honor what you had with him by building something equally good with you. that I would never make you regret choosing to love again." Rose turned and wrapped her arms around her husband, holding him tight. "You have kept that promise 1,000 times over. Thomas would have liked you, I think. He would have approved." They stood together by the grave for a few more moments, then walked hand in hand back to their wagon. The past was honored and remembered, but it was the present and future that called to them now. Years later, when Rose was in her 60s and Marcus in his late 60s, they sat together on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management now, though Rose and Marcus still helped where they could. They had earned their rest, but neither of them was good at sitting still for long. "Remember the day we met?" Rose asked, watching the children chase chickens around the yard just as her own children had done decades before. "Every detail," Marcus confirmed. "You standing by that well with your rifle, looking like you could shoot me without a second thought. I was certain you were going to send me packing. I almost did. If your eyes had not been so kind, or if that barn door had not been hanging so precariously, I probably would have." "Then I owe a debt of gratitude to that barn door." Rose laughed, the sound rich and full. "I was so determined to stay alone, to never let anyone matter to me again. I thought I was protecting myself, but really I was just slowly dying inside. You were surviving the only way you knew how. There is no shame in that. Maybe not. But I am grateful you were stubborn enough to see past my defenses, patient enough to wait for me to heal." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "You were worth waiting for. You were worth everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play and the sun move across the sky. Rose thought about the long journey they had traveled together, from that first cautious acceptance to the deep partnership they now shared. She thought about all the moments that had built their life, the big ones and the small ones, the joys and the struggles. All of it had been worth it to arrive at this place of contentment and fulfillment. As the evening drew on, and the children were called in for supper by their parents, Rose and Marcus remained on the porch. The Oklahoma sky turned gold and pink and purple, painting the world in beautiful colors that never got old no matter how many times they saw them. "I love you," Rose said softly, the words as true now as the first time she had spoken them all those years ago. "I love you too," Marcus replied, his voice warm and certain. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the stars began to appear. Two people who had found each other against the odds and built a life that exceeded anything they could have imagined. The bitter, guarded widow was long gone, replaced by a woman who had learned that love was worth the risk of loss. That opening your heart might lead to pain, but closing it guaranteed a different kind of death. Marcus had been right all those years ago. The simple things were often the best things. A hand to hold, someone to share the work with, laughter in the evening and warmth in the night. Children to raise and a legacy to leave. These were the things that mattered, the things that made life worth living. Rose rested her head on Marcus's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically. They had grown old together, their hair gray and their movements slower, but the connection between them was as strong as ever. They had built something lasting, something true, and they would continue to nurture it until their last days. The ranch spread out before them in the gathering darkness, solid and prosperous, a testament to what could be achieved with patience, partnership, and love. Inside the house, their family gathered, 3 generations all connected by the chance meeting of a bitter widow and a patient cowboy on a hot summer day in 1876. Rose closed her eyes and smiled, utterly content. She had thought her life was over when Thomas died, that she would never be anything more than a bitter woman working herself to death on a failing ranch. But Marcus had shown her otherwise. He had melted her walls one day at a time, not with grand gestures or empty promises, but with simple, steady presence, with respect and kindness, with patience that never wavered and love that never demanded more than she could give. In return, Rose had given him her heart, battered and scarred as it was. She had given him her trust, her partnership, her future. And together, they had built something beautiful, something that would endure long after they were gone. As the stars filled the sky and the night sounds of the prairie began their familiar chorus, Rose and Marcus sat together on their porch, holding hands and watching the world they had built together. It was a good life, a full life, a life neither of them would change for anything. The widow had been bitter and guarded, yes, but the cowboy's patience had melted her walls one day at a time, and in doing so, had given them both a future worth living. They had found in each other exactly what they needed, and that made all the difference in the world.